2020. Can I get a motion to open the meeting, please?
This is Chelsea Batinger. I make a motion to open the public hearing.
Sean Carney, I'll second that motion.
Okay, thank you, Sean. So we have a motion to and a second. So we are now officially open, Karen?
We need to vote.
You have to vote, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You can do a roll call. That's probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, can I have a vote and a roll call while we do that?
And you guys have to unmute yourselves to say yes.
Daniel Charster, yes.
Sean Carney, yes.
Chelsea Batinger, yes.
Lindsay Hinanyag, yes.
Jeff Valencourt, yes. Okay, so we have a vote to open the meeting.
And Mr. Vice Chair, I think if I'm not mistaken, I believe at the end of our meeting last month, the applicant had one additional expert witness. I think that he wanted to refer to tonight. So I'll hand it back to you to inquire if that's if you want to hand it over to the applicant to complete their presentation.
Yes, that would be great. John, Mr. Mancini, did you have a additional person to present?
I do, Mr. Chairman. I just have one additional witness and two total exhibits. And I think that will, at this point, allow us to conclude our presentation.
Very good. You can start.
Great, thank you. Through the chair. Again, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to come tonight. I know we had continued this as a result of the fact that one of our witnesses was not available at the last hearing. We are before the board in respect to the property located at 172 Beaver River Road, Assessor's Plat 8E, Lot 12. The request is for a special use permit for the purpose of constructing a 5.3 megawatt solar installation at the property. At our last hearing, you heard the presentation and our witnesses being Kevin Warren, a registered professional engineer, who presented the site layout. You also heard from Don Layton from Beta Engineering, who presented the landscape plan and the proposed screening and buffering. We also had an archaeologist testified who submitted a written report, Greg Waller. And finally, we heard from Tom Sweeney, who was our real estate expert. Our remaining witness is Mr. Ed Pimentel. His report is identified as Exhibit 20. So I move for the board to accept Exhibit 20 if it hasn't already. And that's the written report prepared as of September 25th, 2020. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I just ask that Mr. Pimentel be sworn in and prepared to testify.
Mr. Pimentel, raise your right hand for me, please. Thank you. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Please state your full name for the record.
It's Edward Pimentel. That's P as in Paul, I-M-E-N-T-E-L.
Mr. Pimentel, you prepared a written report at the request of the applicant.
I actually did prepare a report, and I've actually amended it on a few occasions, as well as having prepared a supplemental report in regards to addressing the requisite standards for the granting of the special use permit.
And can you just briefly summarize your report for the board?
Sure. Just by way of a quick background, it has been a long time since I've been before the Richmond Zoning Board of Review. I have been an urban planner for 30 years, Rhode Island, Mass, Florida. I've worked for several communities in Rhode Island, been a consulting planner for 20 years, been before all 39 cities and towns. Last several years, I've really started to concentrate a lot of my time on solar projects. Probably done 3+ dozen projects from very small to very, very large. This particular project's in that moderate sized range compared to the ones I've worked on. In the last few years, I've taken a different tact to working at solar. A lot of the communities have gotten kind of frustrated with the process. There's been some pushback. I mean, we have these executive orders from the state downward directed to the municipalities through their comprehensive plans about coming up with a game plan to have a balanced approach to the balancing between fossilized fuels and renewable energies. But some of the communities, and understandably, have gotten inundated, started to push back through their regulations, and that is their right to do so. So my tact is always to try, if I get involved in a project, is to see if it meets certain criteria. First and foremost, what is the community's response into regulating the ability to pursue solar facilities? In this case, the town of Richmond, and I understand the regulations have since changed, but in this case, this community had concluded that this particular use was conditionally permitted.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pimento, you really are far away from me. In this case, the community had concluded that,
Let me go back to the sides. Can you hear me better now?
yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. So the town of Richmond had made a determination that they wanted to support solar facilities, and in so doing, within their regulations, they permitted them by special use permit in the residential district, meaning that it was deemed conditionally permitted, provided it meets specific standards of approval, it should be allowed. This isn't like you're departing from the regulations when you're seeking a variance. Understanding that the regulations have since changed, but that is the criteria by which we're pursuing this project. That's first criteria I look for. Second one, and because I've been involved in a lot of development of solar, is how much tree disturbance there is, because there was a lot of pushback that really created a lot of angst among the communities and real resentments towards solar facility developments. So I look to how much tree disturbance. In this particular instance, there's nil. I mean, there was a little bit of scrub brush, but for most part, there is no tree disturbance. That's number two. Number three, clearly, because what is most disconcerting to the municipalities, to the residents, is the visual impacts. So when I get together with the design team, because I have to address from a land use perspective, is how are we going to address the visual impacts? And that's why a good landscape plan and preservation of the existing tree canopy, whatever is present, like along Beaver River, and et cetera. That is kind of the three main crux of when I get involved in a project, if it meets all three. And this particular project, like I said, we're able to preserve whatever tree line there is along the Beaver River to help offset that visual impact from the neighbors opposite the Beaver River. Number two, there is little to no tree disturbance involved in this project. And then number three, the use is permitted by special use. This isn't a prohibited land use. Having said that, what I do typically do then is to do a comprehensive plan analysis and a regulatory analysis of the local communities regulations, as well as those that have been downward directed from the state to the individual municipalities. In this particular circumstance, although it's one of the required criteria now under the state, and I know you're working on a revised comprehensive plan, I know that because I've done a couple of other developments recently outside of solar in Richmond, and that is that you haven't expressly addressed energy in your current comp plan, although I know you're doing it in your revised. But what you did do once again was to note, and it's in my report, how your concerns was to maintain that rural character. And what we tried to do here is to, and by the way, I've amended my report on several occasions, and since the last iteration, due to the efficiency of solar, it's actually reduced a couple of megawatts, and we've been able to shrink it down even a little bit more, the efficiency that is. But the main crux here is to have it appropriately situated, set back off of the respective property boundaries, to delineate where we can, where the view sheds or the most impacted view sheds are, and then to come up with a good game plan on how you're going to offset or screen those view sheds. And that is really when I believe we've met all of the respective standards for granting of the special use permit and to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. The town of Richmond has taken a different stance now in regards to solar, primarily just allowing in the commercial districts, and that is your right to do regulatory wise. But once again, like I said, at the time, this was conditionally permitted in this zone, and I believe we meet all of the standards. I can go into the respective standards individually. So the respective standards is noted in section 18.52.60 of your zoning code. And the first one is the proposed use will not substantially or permanently harm the appropriate use of the surrounding property. Understand that a solar facility is a very passive land use, perhaps one of the most passive land uses that are out there. Number two, it's by far the only land use that I've ever handled that's actually a temporary usage of the property. I know we talk 20 to 30 years, but I've been in this career field for 30 plus years. It really is a blink of an eye. Compare this to a by right residential development, which would be a permanent impediment on the property. Just think of the infrastructure that's needed to accommodate a residential development. Never mind in this situation where the town of Richmond has limited infrastructure, and it's through all of the elements of your comprehensive plan. The lack of public sewage, the lack of public water, the concerns of traffic generated, and then the fiscal impacts. None of these concerns result from introduction of a passive solar facility. And I know there's been a lot of banter thrown around about the environmentals, but the science speaks for itself. A solar facility is a passive, environmentally safe usage of property. Once again, compare that to the residential, where you would have septic systems and wells, and there's the proximity to the Beaver River. To me, a by right residential development would be much more greatly impactful. So having said that, this will not substantially or permanently harm the appropriate usage of the surrounding property in any way, shape, or form. Number two, neither the proposed use nor its location on the site will result in conditions that will harm the public health, safety, and welfare. Once again, I can only speak to this from a land use perspective, not from an environmental and engineering perspective. But from a land use perspective, having done many solar projects, not only is it not harmful because it's safe, but there are instances where it's actually land banking the property for 20 or 30 years, because at the end of the life cycle of the solar, everything, there will be a bond posted, and there will be a game plan put in place where the solar facility installation will be removed. And you're not touching the topsoil, everything will be restored to its original condition. And who knows what the usage of the property could be by then, but at least it land banks it for a while and keeps from being residentially used, which once again, would be much more impactful. And everybody eventually is going to put their property to the full and plausible usage as allowed by the regulations. And then number three, the proposed use will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of this title. Once again, I speak to meeting the standards for the granting of the special use permit, which we do. Number two, what is the intent under the comprehensive for solar? It's to every municipality is trying to fulfill that objective, that goal of that directive of balancing fossilized versus renewable. Right now, there's an order out there to try to generate 1,800 megawatts of solar by 2035. There's even an executive order to try to accumulate 1,000 megawatts by the end of this year. And I think we're only about a third way to halfway there. It's a difficult thing to do. There's been a lot of pushback, and I understand why. Believe me, I do. The angst doesn't fall on these ears, that doesn't fall on deaf ears here. And that's why I've kind of cautioned myself in the type of projects that I get involved in, the kind of projects that I feel confident from a land use perspective that I can support. And I believe this is definitely one that meets on all of the standards and all of the goals and objectives. I don't know if council has any specific questions.
Yes, yes, Ed. Can you describe for the board, so strike that. In your opinion, is the proposed development consistent with the comprehensive plan with respect to the issuance of a special use permit?
Yes, it is. Like I've stated before, there's actually a requirement now pursuant to the state enabling legislation. The state directs down to the municipalities all of the requisite elements. And one of those criteria now is to address renewable energy in general and renewable energy specific. Like I said, I know it's being addressed in your revised comp plan, but at least from the perspective of the comp plan that's in play right now, you talk about preservation of rural character. I'm stating to this board, a passive temporary usage of property for solar, land banks property, it does accommodate that. It's the concern is the visuals, and I believe we can satisfy those view sheds and protect the integrity of this property and the view sheds from any abutting neighbor. So I believe it is absolutely consistent with the comp plan.
In the fact that the zoning ordinance has in the R3 zone permitted the SES, the solar energy systems, as a conditionally permitted use. What does that mean in the context of land use?
Yeah, so in the context of both uh, Rhode Island general law and then even more so in Rhode Island case law, what it means to be determined to be allowed by special use permit, the courts have concluded that means that it's already been determined to be a permissible land use, subject to reasonable conditions of approval if they so need be required to, and the board has a series of conditions they can impose. But what the courts have said is that if a particular standard, for whatever reason, cannot be met, I believe they all can be met, but if they cannot be met, then the objective of the local board is to impose conditions, then that would be to realize the affirmation of that particular standard, not to find fault with it and deny it, because the legislative body, that being the council, has already concluded that this particular land use is appropriate in this district. There would have to be something so significant about a particular property to be used for a particular manner that would result in a denial. And I clearly don't see any reason for that here.
Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Is it Ed? Or is it
It is
Kevin?
Ed.
It's Ed.
I'm Ed.
And I'm John.
Yeah, okay. I had a question there, Ed, on the removal and disposal of the site. I don't know if you have this particular information, but just clicked in my head. There's an underground duck bank that's being put in from the property through the town road to a particular location, correct?
Not to skirt your question, but I think that's a question for the engineer to address. I wasn't involved in any offsite improvements.
Okay.
The project engineer is here.
Oh, he is? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I can speak to that.
Did you want to come to this chair? Because you're not being seen on the screen.
No, it'll turn around.
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
okay.
there I am. Sorry. So is the question,
Your name, sir?
Kevin Moran with Green Development, a registered professional civil engineer?
I do not, I apologize, but I do not remember if I swore him in.
You did. He was our first witness, but we'll have him sworn in again.
No, I believe you. It's okay. I can check the record after. It's not a problem.
So the question, I think that, I'm not sure if it's completed, but I think the question is the infrastructure that's put in the public right of way, is that
Yeah.
also part of the decommissioning?
Yes, I wanted to understand that portion of it because can you explain that again so that the board understands that it's a duck bank that's gonna actually travel down Beaver River Road and then what takes a right-hand turn or left-hand turn?
Yeah, it would, so there'd be an underground conduit running from the project site at the interconnection point. It runs south on Beaver River Road, within the paved area of the road, within the cleared or established right of way. Then it would make if you're running south on Beaver River Road, it would turn left or run east on Shannock Hill Road. And that would tie into where the overhead lines currently terminate on Shannock Hill Road on the east side of the Beaver River. So that the decommissioning that typically takes place is on the project site. That duck bank really gets turned over to National Grid, and they have actually a couple of pieces of equipment that would be on the property here. Those would be decommissioned, but the portion within the public right-of-way, to my knowledge, would remain and be owned by National Grid at that point.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because it was mentioned the decommissioning and I know that it's part of the project or part of the construction and whether or not that's going to remain and the DPW of town needs to be aware of this and how it works for them. You know, I'm not sure how many of those are around currently and so forth and so on.
And Mr. Chairman, Daniel Jarster, board member, I have a question. It seems that the applicant has their team present. And I have a question related back to the testimony we heard a month ago. And since how we're still dealing with them, is that in order?
Yes, please go right ahead, Daniel.
We were given testimony about the visual screening and so forth, and the setback, and then the burn and the trees. And the testimony, as I recall, was that when you approach the site from the north on Beaver River Road, that there's a sufficient tree line in place that you would not see the solar array if you were coming from that direction. I live in that area. I bicycle on that road. I don't. That testimony does not seem true to me, because they're large trees and their trunks are there, but that's the only thing at the level of the road that obscures anything. It's a wide open visual area. And it would seem to me that the applicant, if they're seeking to follow through with a visual screen and they're preserving the rural area, that something needs to be done as you approach the site from the north. And I wonder if we were told there wasn't a plan because it wasn't necessary. And I'm wondering if that's really accurate and if there's something that will be done.
Yeah, I believe Don Layden is on the call with us. He's not present in the conference room we're in, but.
Mr. Vice Chair, I could move Don Layton into the attendee category to the panelist if it's at your pleasure.
That would be wonderful. Let's do that. And that would be great for Daniel to be able to interact with him too.
Okay,
So
Don has been moved into as a panelist. And Don, I think if you're on the call as a panelist, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yeah, there we go. Yes, good evening all. Yes. So I'd like to just back up and just clarify a couple things. The testimony I gave a month ago was that the existing trees along Beaver River Road would remain as is. We are not intending to take any of them down, but they were not meant to be the screening between the road and the visual access to where the solar panels would be. There's a 138-foot setback from the road before we are proposing to construct a 25-foot wide vegetative buffer. So the buffer that is part of the planting plan is meant to screen any view from the roadway. There are certain trees between the existing house, and that was a question that came up in the last meeting, is that there's an existing house on the west side of the road with a second story window, or actually a couple of windows. And the question was, would they be able to see from the second story the solar arrays? And we did go back out and measure and check that. And with the buffer in place after a 3-year establishment period, that visual from the second story would probably diminish to a point where they would not see the solar arrays. So just to clarify, the existing trees would remain along the road, and in particular, those large white pines that we talked about that sit just behind the existing house that's on the property. Those would remain as well. But the intent is that the visual buffer would be created by this landscape plan that we are proposing and as part of this application.
Mr. Layton, that was all clear to me. My question is, if you're driving southbound on Beaver River Road, there is a row of large hardwoods, very mature hardwoods that are planted east-west. And there's a clear gap between each one of those that would give a visual sight of the proposed location of the solar array. I don't see anything in the plan. I've not heard any testimony that says there would be anything to augment that. Thus, it would seem to me that anybody driving southbound on Beaver River Road is going to have a clear view of the array.
Well, you are correct in that description of what a driver would see or a bicyclist or pedestrian heading south. on the plan as it stands today, we extended the landscape buffer to the property line. But in our field visit, which happened a week and a half after the first meeting, we did decide that if we were to turn that buffer in an easterly direction, parallel to the hardwoods that you just described, it would be a improved buffer and visual interruption between the road and the solar arrays. So we are prepared to make those amendments so that that plan can be improved upon based on your comments that you just made.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Any other questions that the board members may have for Don while he's on?
This is Chelsea Batinger. I just had a question for Mr. Sweeney. I don't know if he's still on the call.
He's on.
Yes, I can move Tom Sweeney into the panelist, Mr. Vice Chair.
That'd be wonderful.
Okay, Tom Sweeney has been moved in as a panelist.
Agree.
Um,
Go right ahead, Chelsea.
Okay. Mr. Sweeney, I was just wondering, last month when you presented, the comp studies that you had were only in Illinois and North Carolina, I believe. I was just curious why there's no other studies in the Northeast.
Ms. Batinger, if you remember, I also quoted the only study that's been completed in the Northeast, which was done by Dr. Corey Lang at the University of Rhode Island. That is also, it was not referenced in my report because my report was submitted, I believe, about this time last year. And Dr. Lang's study did not come out until end of September, early October of 2020. In Dr. Lang's study, specifically, he states that the presence of or the development of this type of solar property in rural areas has no negative impact. And again, this is, I won't call it a preliminary study, but he hasn't gone into the deep dig on it yet, namely looking at the impacts of screening as proposed here. Additionally, one thing he did note was that it's better from his perspective that the developments this type of developments being done on what is already disturbed land and not going into, taking down more green space. At the end of the day, his conclusion is that in rural areas, there is no negative impact. And the other reports just support that even further, but the URI report clearly supports what I stated and quoted from the other reports. So while I didn't have the information when I initially submitted the report, I did specifically reference it the last time in front of the board.
And I don't have the report right in front of me, but what states did Dr. Lang conduct the study in?
Rhode Island and Massachusetts.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, does any other board members have a question for Mr. Sweeney?
I have a follow-up to the previous questioner. Mr. Sweeney made reference to the report. Did he present the report from URI as evidence, or did he just refer to it?
I did refer to it, Mr. Jasper. I can literally give a copy of the report, get it to the board. Again, I did not submit it because it wasn't part of my original submission.
Understood. Yeah, if you have that, I think that'd be helpful.
I'd be more than happy to submit it.
Through the chair, if I may, we will submit that to your town planner and ask that it be entered as a supplemental exhibit.
Thank you, Mr.
Can I
Mancini.
interrupt for just a second? If the board is planning to make a finding of fact based on that report or based on Mr. Sweeney's testimony about that report, and you need to reference the report itself, you shouldn't be reading it after the public hearing is closed. You should be reading it before another public hearing so that you can ask questions about it and discuss it among yourselves. And if you wait until after the public hearing is closed, you're not going to be able to discuss it or make findings of fact on it. So that's up to you how you want to do that. If you think that it's important to look at the report and to be able to discuss it, ask questions, maybe use it as a basis for findings of fact, then you would need to have Mr. Sweeney introduce that as an exhibit and continue the public hearing so that you'll have an opportunity to discuss it.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Sweeney, are you available to submit that in a timely fashion?
I believe Mr. Mancini just stated that I can literally email it to the town clerk right now if I have to. But again, Mr. Mancini, I defer to you.
Yes, and I don't object to your solicitor's comment. And what I would offer is that Mr. Sweeney has testified to it. He has introduced it. And what I would request is a request of the board is the opportunity to physically transmit it either by mail or email to the planner to then disseminate among the board members for you to consider it in conjunction with Mr. Sweeney. And we can do that as early as tomorrow.
Okay, very good, thank you.
And also through the chair, what we will do is also, I think we have a revised plan that includes what Mr. Don Layton described earlier with regards to the revised buffer and screening. And so we will submit that as well.
Excellent. I'm curious, this type of vegetation buffer has been done previously in the past in the town of Richmond?
We'll ask.
I don't know if if it came through. I just wanted to know if this proposed type of vegetation in front of the solar arrays, has that been done in the town of Richmond before?
So this is Don Layton. I'm gonna bounce that question over to Kevin Moran, because we have not proposed this buffer before in the town of Richmond, but Kevin may know of projects. I know there are other projects that he's worked on, so I'll let Kevin answer that.
Yeah, and Kevin Moore, and I'm not aware of any projects, certainly none that our office has constructed in Richmond, nor am I familiar with any others in Richmond. I think it's more substantial than other buffers that I've seen, that I can say. And particularly one in Hopkinton that was planted fairly recently, that was substantial. This is more, has more material, greater width than anything else I've been involved with.
Okay, I was just. Yep, go ahead, Chelsea.
Go ahead, Jeff. Okay, this is Chelsea Batinger. I just had another question. I don't know if we touched on, I can't remember, if we talked about any noise that the solar panels make. I don't know if we had testimony on that.
We did. I believe Kevin had testified to that, and we can refer back to him to reiterate and answer that. And it's actually part of the it's part of the PowerPoint presentation.
Just bear with me 1 second.
I believe if we're good with Mr. Sweeney, we can move him back, Sean, if that's necessary.
Will do. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yeah, bear with me 1 second.
Board members, I was just inquiring on that to see any type of completed projects as to what we, what real life proposed buffers that they have completed in the past is going to look like. That's what I'd be interested in seeing. The finished product.
I think it's a legitimate question, one that I have as well.
Jeff, could
Well,
I ask
well,
John
Kevin-
Mancini a question?
Yeah, so what I was saying is,
John,
one of the issues, yes, can you hear me?
John,
Yes.
if we're gonna have to continue the public hearing anyway, maybe your team can find some examples, not necessarily in Richmond, but maybe in other communities, of similar vegetative buffers, and give that information to Sean Lacy so that the zoning board members, if they want to, can go out and look at them themselves.
We can do that. I will, actually, I'll have the team email that to Sean with the other material. There's a project in Hopkinton that Kevin had referred to, which is complete. And you can see the landscaping done at that project. That also included some fencing as well. So that, I think that would be a good project for the board to look at. And one of the other things too that we would be amenable with is a landscaping bond, something that gives the town assurance that this landscaping is maintained, and that in the event that it fails to comport with the plans for whatever reason, you have a mechanism in place to ensure that it does meet the specifications of the plans.
Apparently the solar array is going to generate a lot of revenue, Donna.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're talking about spending a whole lot of money. I mean, you heard just the National Grid hookup.
And we can, Dan Jarsford, we can hear you. Just want
I'm
to make
sorry.
sure you're muted. Yep, no problem.
Apologize. I have another question if that one's finished.
Yeah, go right ahead.
I know that you're looking for the information about the noise. I don't know that this has been answered, but the conversation, the project as it's presented is that in 25 years, it'll be removed from the site, a bond's left in place, it'll be returned to agricultural land or whatever the next plan is. My question is the panels, I'm imagining a lot of it's metal that's recyclable. Are there things in the panels that are a hazardous material that present a problem with disposal that have their own environmental impact at the end of their life?
Yeah, Kevin can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, whatever can be recycled certainly will be recycled. I think we accounted for some of that in the decommissioning estimate in terms of steel, aluminum, wire, things like that. The panels themselves, I mean, there may be a secondary market for panels even at a 25-year life. There's still roughly 80% of the rated output that in that ballpark that's available. So there could be a secondary market where they could be recycled in that fashion or disposed of. There's no chemicals or any fluids that would leak or leach out of panels. I think whatever could be recycled based on technology at that time certainly would be, or they'd be disposed of according to regulations in effect at that time. We get and can provide, certainly as part of additional information, the panels that are selected. We can provide the MSDS, the sheets that identify the nature of the materials in those components. And we've done that in other communities with the building permits, things like that.
I don't know that that's really what I'm looking for. Just what you're testifying to is, I think, sufficient. Is there a process involving hazardous material in making the panels?
There's, I'm not intimately familiar with the manufacturing process, but the panels that are shipped, delivered, the MSDS sheets are it's not a hazardous material. It's not regulated as such. There's no liquid components. If the glass were to break in a hailstorm or something like that, nothing comes out of it in terms of leaking. I think there's been studies that look at what could leach out of the materials, and I'm aware of one that was done by a consultant for a different project, and there was nothing that leaches out of these, even when they're broken, crushed, things like that.
Okay, that's a helpful answer. I appreciate it.
I didn't forget about the noise question. I thought we had it in our PowerPoint last meeting. I don't see it in there, so I apologize. I thought we spoke with that on the at the last meeting, but I can provide some supplemental information on that.
Yeah,
My apology.
and so you, just on a kind of a high level answer to that, the solar panels themselves do not emanate any noise. Is that correct, Kevin?
That's correct.
And the only thing that does emanate noise are the transformers?
Yeah, the transformers and inverters, the equipment pads, essentially.
Yeah. And how many equipment pads, transformers are on this project?
We have, I believe, 5, excuse me.
And are these transformers similar to other transformers that you've worked with in other communities?
Yes.
And do any of these transformers violate any of those communities' noise ordinance, to your knowledge?
They
Could
do
you repeat
not.
it, John? Please repeat your question.
Sure, apologize. To your knowledge, Kevin, do these transformers violate any other town ordinances concerning noise?
No, I guess just state the obvious. If this, at night, there's absolutely no noise generated. It's only when daytime hours, certainly when it's sunnier day, it's producing more power. It's generating a little more noise, but we haven't seen any issues with exceedances, and we'll provide that information.
Okay.
This is Dan Jarson again. The noise is I've worked in electronics and electrical in the past, and so it would something be generally described as maybe a hum.
That's accurate. Yes.
That's accurate.
I know I was speaking earlier. I didn't have my mic muted, and I apologize for that. But it does bring up a question that obviously there's a tremendous amount of expense in doing this. The panels, the labor to install them, the buffer, and the hookup to National Grid. Just for my curiosity, with a site of what is paid for a megawatt of power. I know what my power bill is, but I've tried to quantify that into where you're generating power. What's the expected revenue stream just to make this reasonable? Obviously it must be, but I've not seen any figures on that.
Well, I mean, it's sold similar to your electric bill. You're paying on a per kilowatt hour basis, and it depends on the program that it's in. If it's selling power to National Grid, you can bid into a program that way. You can do a remote net metering proposal with a town or a quasi-public or nonprofit or agency. In there, you get a discount rate. Usually, I think the last National Grid contract that we bid into, I want to say was in the ballpark of 12 cents. That frame
per kilowatt hour.
It's hard to. I don't have that number offhand.
And it could range as high as 30 cents, depending on the program and the discount.
Right, a smaller project would get a higher rate than a larger project, a 5 megawatt project versus a 250 kilowatt project. There's a different threshold or different programs that you can bid into with National Grid. So it's a little complicated. Depends on which way this project goes. We haven't dedicated or gone through that exercise of an off-taker and if we're going to bid it into National Grid's renewable energy growth program.
I understand, and I know it's a market that fluctuates to different buyers and sellers. I guess like my confusion is because it talks about, I'm not sure if it's a 7.4 or I think there was a number in there, 5.7 megawatt. Is that watt hour, megawatt hour?
No, no. Then basically you can get into production, which looks at how efficient is the system, how many kilowatt hours or megawatt hours does it produce, in the summer versus, and you look at that, that's a model that's done with programs. PV-Syst is the program that we use, but it looks at production over the whole year based on the sun, based on how many sunny days we typically have on average, in the efficiency of the system. So the AC is a set, that's a limitation, the 5.25 megawatts AC, that's everything National Grid has studied is based on that. It produces more than that on a kilowatt hour or megawatt hour basis, but and then the DC is just based on how many panels you have at a certain production, 400 watts per panel or 500, whatever it is. That's the DC nameplate that goes with it. But National Grid really is limiting us on the AC size. It can get no bigger than that 5.25 AC.
Okay. All right. Well, that's helpful. I appreciate it. I don't want to take up too much time with that.
This is Chelsea Baitinger. Back to the sound thing. I understand the transformers make a humming sound. What the people that live across the street, I mean, will they hear that if they're outside? I just want to know, what the impact on the neighbors are.
Yeah, well, what I'll provide is a map of the decibel level at distances, including at the street, at Beaver River Road, as compared to the ordinance as well.
Okay. Will they hear it or will they not hear it?
I don't believe they'll hear it. I think it'll be below.
And we can stipulate to that as well as to a condition of approval that the noise that emanates shall not be exceedant of a particular decibel.
These are static panels, they don't move.
They don't move.
Correct.
Transformers, oil or dry type?
Oil, but typically it's a mineral oil. It's not anything with PCBs or anything like that. And we did stipulate, I think, in our, the documentation provided, and I think we discussed with the planning board, we would have containment in those locations where the equipment pads are located.
How often does that oil get changed?
Not very free. It's tested, but it doesn't need to get changed frequently. I think it's tested a little outside my realm of expertise, but maybe yearly after a certain number of years of operation. I'm not aware of us changing oil on anything we've had in operation for the last 3 years.
And those particular components, they're not going to become part of National Grid's infrastructure. Those are going to be privately owned components.
That's correct. Yep, those would be part of any decommissioning effort down the road as well.
And they're also part of a warranty that we receive as well. So they are guaranteed and warranted by the manufacturer.
Absolutely. John, when we do that, the landscape presentation on previously installed sites, I would like to make sure that we have multiple growth years presented if we could. That would be nice. What we have for, a new installation compared to, I heard somebody say, a 3-year established growth. So if we can have, multiple years presented, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, you can show the maturity of the growth at different stages.
Absolutely.
John Carney, I've got a question. Taking a little different tact, the system is a one-way street, basically from the solar panels out to the grid. Obviously, you've mentioned that National Grid has limited us on the size. Question, what benefit does the town get to having the solar field in place?
I can answer in part to that. So there's essentially two benefits. One is there's a monetary gain. Obviously, there are the taxes of the infrastructure itself, the solar panels, although that's limited by state statute at 5,000 per megawatt. And then there's also the real estate taxes that's attributed for the I guess the land, the real estate underneath it. So you tax two different components. So that's one advantage. Second is, and I think this was testified to, that the owners are no longer farming this property, and as as you just heard from Ed Pimentel earlier, it's a temporary use. So you're still preserving this land as an agricultural piece as opposed to a residential development. It is a 25-year use. It's what our anticipation is. And you know, one of the questions I heard earlier from one of the board members is, it seemed like there's a lot of money in this. And the way this works is there's a great deal of expenditure that's done up front, and this project becomes stabilized very quickly, which is different from a residential development where sometimes it doesn't get stabilized for many years to come. It only gets stabilized after you've built X amount of condo units or X amount of residential dwellings. This is different. The upfront cost gets captured almost once the infrastructure is done, and then it's paid off during the period of 25 years. And that's how we're able to, you know, basically crunch numbers and determine what's feasible and what's not feasible. The output is determined from an actuary standpoint based on science, based on number of sunny days, based on production, and then it goes into a different program. But we have the parameters as to how the initial infusion of capital is going to be paid back and how it grows over time. But as far as infrastructure, what is going to be there on day one is what's going to be there on day 25. So it doesn't change. It's very stagnant. So it becomes very easy from a financing perspective, which is different from a residential development, different from any other development that you would see, whether it's commercial, big box, retail, or residential. This is something that gets captured quickly. And I think that's probably why you see developers having the ability to agree to landscaping bonds, road bonds, decommissioning bonds, agree to give you extensive landscaping and buffers. Those are things that we can calculate at this stage with some sense of certainty.
That's really helpful. A follow-up question to that. This is Daniel Jarstifer again. I'm assuming, and I'm asking that then it would seem that once it's done and set up, that there's very little maintenance costs. Is that correct?
That's the point. There's very little maintenance cost. This is going to be remotely monitored, so it's like having someone there every day, but no one's going to be there. We'll be able to monitor it from the offices here, so you'll know what issues, if any issues, are being taken. The landscaping is going to be on a maintenance plan. That will be done either weekly or biweekly or monthly, depending on what's going on there. There's no snow removal there. That actually takes place itself. So the maintenance of these are very low.
A question concerning the panels themselves with the water runoff. Not sure if that was addressed or talked about, but I do know when a large structure is built with a roof line, let's say, if you were to take all these panels per se and give me a square footage of the roof, if all these panels are actually a roof, and you took the square footage of all those panels and added them up, am I at a 80,000 square foot building or a 300,000 square foot building, and how that, you know, water runoff and gutter system, how that erosion takes place on the land that you're working on, and how that goes to the Beaver River aquifer or whatever you want to call it, how that flows. Do we have any type of testimony concerning that part of the dynamics of this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So you asked about the solar panels themselves. So if you put all the panels together, no space in between panel to panel, edge to edge, it's about 7.16 acres. Again, with newer panels, we were able to reduce that. Originally, it was closer to 10 acres. So panels becoming more efficient from the last 2 years, we were able to reduce that footprint. The panels, there's a grass strip between each row of panels. There's a space between each panel itself. So in terms of runoff, it's traveling a very small distance over that panel before it's going down to the ground. Based on the topography, the slopes that we have on this site, we're not anticipating any type of erosion issue or channelization at the drip edge. In some sites, we have seen that and addressed that with either a turf reinforcement, like a jute netting at the drip edge, or stone trenches to sort of cut off and prevent channelization of water. We didn't see that here. DEM looks at that as well when we get into design reviews with Rhode Island DEM. It didn't come up on this site. And I think it's probably gonna be less problematic with the solar, with grass established under it than a fallow field over the winter with kind of sparse cover, which I think is what this site has seen, maybe not over the last winter or two, but certainly before that.
Now, when you say when you say there's established grass under it, you're anticipating that during the construction of this, that grass is going to be maintained and non-impacted?
No, I'm sorry. In operation during construction, we did include in the plan a soil erosion plan with temporary sediment basins. It depends how the array is constructed. I mean, some sites we have been able to establish a really good grass cover and then come in afterward to put in the post for the solar, the electrical with not a lot of disturbance. That really depends on time of year, weather, a lot of things. But we do have a series of sediment traps as temporary measures. If needed, those would be implemented, and it's part of our RIDEM review and approval as well. But they'd be temporary. We could once the site stabilized, we could grade those back just to a grassed area.
Thank you.
John Carney again. Got a quick question, with the vegetative buffers, will they be going in before the panels or after the panels? Is it something that people are going to see the construction and then the panels come in after the fact? If you could walk us through the steps of that, just high level.
Yeah, I think I gave testimony at the last meeting that depending on time of year, we'd be willing to, again, if the project starts in winter, it's not time to be planning, or in the middle of July necessarily, but time of year, we've offered to pre-plant the buffer. For projects starting in spring or late fall, when planting's appropriate, we're open to implementing this planting plan at the early stage of the project, not at the end of the project. Again, if the project starts in January, that's really not feasible. But we certainly, would entertain that, or condition along those lines, if appropriate.
Thank you.
So I guess we can have our feed input on that, Sean.
Making notes.
So everybody's making notes. Any other questions for our landscape architect or Mr. Mancini's witnesses here?
Mr. Vice Chair, are we drawing near the end of the testimony for the applicant? Or are there other phases of their testimony that we haven't heard yet?
I think that was their final person to present, and our opportunity here to ask them questions. We can refer back to them anytime, and we could move along to our next presenter, which I believe would be the town, if I'm not mistaken. Karen, correct? Or Sean?
I believe you are. Sean, I don't see Mike Cozzolino on this call. Is he around someplace?
I don't see Mike on the call. I do see Bo.
I know Bo,
On.
but he needs Mike too.
Okay.
I don't know where he is. He's AWOL.
Yeah, I didn't hear from Mike going into tonight's meeting. I did have some materials that I just wanted to convey to the zoning board as well.
Well, we need to find out right away whether or not he's available to go ahead.
I'm going to see if I can unmute Bo for a moment to see if he had the chance to speak with Michael today. Bo, if you are on the call and you can hear this, you'll want to hit *6 to unmute yourself, please.
There he is.
Yeah, I talked to Mike today. He was going to shoot you a email to see because he didn't have the tie-ins on the telephone or the computer input, and I didn't have them either when I talked to him.
Yeah, so I wasn't in contact with Mike at all today.
So, Bo, what are you saying? You're saying that he didn't have the link to get in the meeting?
That's correct.
Oh, what's on the website? On the town website?
I think he asked me that question. I told him it was probably on there.
Yeah, it is.
Also, I think we lost Lindsay.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
Oh, she's in under attendees, Sean.
Thanks, Chelsea. I'll move her. I'll move
Okay.
her back in. Thanks for catching that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Chelsea.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that, Lindsay. We must have lost you momentarily.
To answer your question, Jeff, I believe that the town did want to put on a case, and I'm not really. It's up to the board whether or not they want to hear it, of course, but I'm not really sure if the town is not available this evening to proceed, whether or not you want to go straight to comments from the public, or whether you want to continue the hearing another month for when Mike Cozzolino is available. I'm thinking it's probably not a good idea to have people comment or ask questions when all the testimony hasn't been heard yet.
Yeah, I do agree with you on that. I'd like to get the applicant and the town presenters or whoever else is going to present on this officially done, and then
Right.
move forward to the court,
Yeah,
and
I really think that would be the best way to do it.
yeah, it'd be the best calendar or best order of events.
Yeah.
So any other board members have any other questions or insight or would like any other information from the applicants tonight, please. If not, we'll just, I'll look for a motion to continue this meeting.
First, can we just check with John Mancini to make sure that he's going to be available on January 25th?
On January, what was the date?
25th.
That's fine for the applicant's team. That's fine, Karen, Mr. Chairman, through the chair, that's fine for us.
Okay, great, thank you.
That's fine,
Okay,
and that will give us time to also provide you with the supplemental information as well.
right. Yeah,
Excellent. That actually may work out just fine.
yeah. So I think what you want is a motion to continue the public hearing to January 25th.
This is Chelsea Batinger. I make a motion to continue the public hearing to January 25th.
Mr. Daniel,
Go ahead,
Go ahead, Sean.
Daniel.
no, go, Sean.
Sean Carney, I'll second that motion. Sorry, Daniel.
That's okay.
Do we have a vote?
It'll be easier
Aye.
when we're all in the same room.
Yeah, I would suggest we just do a quick roll call.
Chelsea Batinger, aye.
Jeff Valencourt, aye.
Lindsay Hannon, aye.
Daniel Jarvis for aye.
And Sean Carney, aye.
All right. So we shall continue until January 25th.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to all the attendees on the call tonight, thank you for joining the platform. We will have a similar format for the January meeting. You just log on through the web link or through the toll-free number, and then ultimately, when that time comes for public comment, obviously we'll recognize you in the order at that time. So thank you all, and happy holidays to everyone.
Thanks, Sean. Bye.
Have a good night, everyone.
Merry Christmas to those of you left.
Yeah, same to you, Sean.
You too.
Do we just have to do a formal motion to adjourn, or did we already do that?
Karen, you're muted.
You need to adjourn.
Hey, Sean, don't go anywhere. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
This is Sean Carney. I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Do I get a second, Daniel?
I'm sorry, I missed that. I thought you were done.
Just
What's the
motion
motion?
to-
To adjourn,
yeah.
absolutely. I will second that. I heard you say something just as I went, so I came back.
I saw that.
Yeah, you can adjourn on 3 votes. You can do that.
I vote to adjourn also.
Okay. Send it
Yay.
to George.
Thank you.
Good thing I came back.
Yes.
It is.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Merry
Night,
Christmas,
everybody.
everyone.